The call came in a little after 10 on a Thursday morning, right when I was under a gray F-150 changing out a leaking transmission line. Marty, my front desk guy, leaned into the service bay with the cordless phone in his hand and said, "Jack, it's some hotel asking for you. Sounds important." I wiped my hands on a rag and took it without thinking much about it. "This is Jack." A woman's voice, polite and professional, answered right away. "Hello, sir. I'm calling from the front desk at the Riverside Suites. I'm sorry to bother you, but your wife appears to have left her wedding ring in one of our rooms after checkout." For a second, I didn't say anything. I just stood there with grease drying on my knuckles and the smell of motor oil all around me. "I think you've got the wrong number," I said. She paused, then added, careful like she was reading from something in front of her. "The ring is engraved. It says, Jack and Emily forever. We found it on the nightstand while turning over the room." I looked across the shop without really seeing it. The lift, the tool chest, the open hood in Bay 2. Everything stayed where it was, but something in my head shifted. "My wife didn't stay in a hotel," I said. "I understand, sir. I'm only calling because this number was listed on the reservation contact." "Reservation contact?" I swallowed and asked what room. She told me. Then she told me the checkout had been that morning. That morning, Emily had left the house around 8 in her navy blouse and office shoes, coffee in one hand, purse on her shoulder. She had kissed me on the cheek on her way out. I remembered it because I'd been standing at the kitchen counter, and I'd watched her tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear before she left. And I remembered one other thing clear as glass. She had been wearing her ring. Not just any ring. The ring from our church wedding 12 years earlier. The same gold band I had slid onto her finger while both our families watched. I tightened my grip on the phone. The woman at the hotel was still talking, asking whether I wanted them to hold it at the desk. I told her yes. Then I hung up and stood there in the middle of my own shop, holding a dirty rag in one hand and a silence I didn't know what to do with in the other. I picked up the ring that afternoon. The Riverside Suites sat just off the highway, the kind of place travelers used when they didn't plan on staying long. Neutral colors, clean carpets, a quiet lobby that smelled faintly like lemon cleaner and coffee. The woman at the desk slid a small plastic bag across the counter. Inside it was the ring. Simple gold band. Slight scratch near the edge from years of wear. The engraving inside was still clear. Jack and Emily forever. I didn't say much. Just thanked her, signed a small form confirming I picked it up, and walked back to my truck. I sat there for a while with the bag resting on the passenger seat. The strange part wasn't the hotel itself. What stayed in my mind was the morning. Emily leaving the house the same way she always did. Same routine we'd followed for years. Our life had been simple. I owned a small auto repair shop on the south side of town. Nothing fancy. 3 bays, steady customers, enough work to keep the lights on and the mortgage paid. I'd built the place slowly over 15 years. Most days started early and ended with grease still under my nails. Emily worked across town at an office for a medical supply company. Paperwork, orders, logistics, things I never asked many questions about because she seemed to enjoy it. Our schedule rarely changed. I opened the shop around 7. She left the house around 8. In the evenings we met back at home, usually around 6. Dinner together at the small kitchen table. Sometimes television afterward. Sometimes just quiet. Weekends were even simpler. Groceries. Yard work. Maybe a movie if something decent was playing. It wasn't exciting, but it was stable. The kind of life you don't question because everything works the way it's supposed to. At least, that's what I believed. Looking back, there had been small changes. Emily had started staying late at work more often over the past few months. She'd usually text around 5:30. "Busy day? Might be late tonight." I never thought much about it. Offices had deadlines, meetings, things that ran past normal hours. Sometimes she came home tired and went straight to the shower before dinner. Sometimes she said they were preparing for a new contract or dealing with shipment issues. It all sounded normal enough. When you live beside someone for more than a decade, you stop analyzing every small shift. You trust the routine you built together. That was the rhythm of our life. Work, home, quiet evenings. The ring in the plastic bag sat on the seat beside me while I drove back to the shop, catching light from the afternoon sun. For 12 years it had never left Emily's hand. And that morning, when she walked out the door, it hadn't been missing. I didn't mention the ring when Emily came home that night. She walked through the front door a little after 6, set her purse on the chair by the kitchen wall, and said the same thing she usually said when work had been long. Today was exhausting. I nodded from the stove and kept stirring the pot of chili. Nothing about the moment looked unusual. Her voice sounded the same. Her movements were familiar. If someone had filmed the scene, it would have looked like any other evening in our house. But once something shifts in your mind, you start noticing details that used to pass quietly by. Emily washed her hands at the sink. When she reached for the towel, I saw her left hand clearly. The ring was there. Same gold band. Same small scratch near the edge. If you didn't know about the phone call, nothing about it would have stood out. But I had spent 20 minutes that afternoon looking at the ring inside that plastic bag from the hotel. I had held it in my hand. The thought crossed my mind that maybe the hotel had made a mistake. Maybe someone else had a ring with the same engraving. It wasn't impossible. But the woman at the front desk had read the inscription word for word. Jack and Emily forever. After dinner, Emily sat on the couch and checked something on her phone. I noticed she tilted the screen slightly away, the way people do when they're typing a message they don't want someone else to see. That alone wasn't proof of anything. Still, it stayed with me. Later that night, when she set the phone down on the coffee table, the screen went dark almost immediately. A passcode lock appeared before I could even read the time. I tried to remember if she'd always had one. Maybe she had. Maybe I had just never noticed. Over the next few days, I found myself paying attention to things that had always been part of the background. The late nights at work. The sudden meetings that seemed to appear toward the end of the day. The way she sometimes stepped into the hallway to take a phone call instead of answering it in the same room. None of those things were dramatic on their own. Any one of them could have had a simple explanation. But when you place small details next to each other, they start forming something larger. Patterns have always made sense to me. Working on engines teaches you that. A noise by itself means very little. But a noise combined with vibration and a drop in pressure, that tells you where the problem is hiding. Over the next week, I stopped trying to dismiss the feeling. Instead, I started watching the pattern. About a week after the phone call, something inside me settled into place. Not anger, not panic, just clarity. If you've made it this far, this story clearly caught your attention. If you're enjoying it, drop a like on the video. It helps me see what kind of stories you want more of next. Let's keep going. Before that, part of me had still been searching for explanations. Small ones. Reasonable ones. Maybe the hotel had mixed up the room. Maybe the engraving was a coincidence. Maybe there was some story that would connect everything in a way that made sense again. But the more I watched, the less those explanations held together. Emily started staying late 2 or 3 nights a week. Sometimes she texted before 5. Meeting ran long. Other nights the message came closer to 7. Still at the office. Don't wait for dinner. Her tone never sounded nervous. If anything, she seemed calm. Comfortable. Like someone following a routine that had been working for a long time. That was the moment something shifted inside me. I stopped trying to explain things. Instead, I accepted a possibility I hadn't wanted to consider before, that the life I believed I was living might not be the real one. Outwardly, nothing changed. I still opened the shop at 7 every morning. I still worked through the same steady line of brake jobs, oil leaks, and worn-out alternators. Customers came and went. Engines turned over. The rhythm of the place stayed exactly the same. At home, dinner still happened at the kitchen table. We talked about small things. Weather, work, a neighbor who had finally replaced his fence after putting it off for months. Emily laughed at something on television one night the same way she always had. I remember watching her from the other end of the couch and realizing how normal everything looked from the outside. If someone had walked into our house, they would have seen a couple living a quiet, ordinary life. But inside, something had already separated. I didn't ask her questions about work anymore. I didn't try to connect the late nights with the schedule she mentioned at dinner. I simply listened. And I remembered. Years of running a repair shop had taught me something useful. When a machine starts showing strange symptoms, the worst thing you can do is start tearing parts out immediately. You watch first. You gather information. You let the pattern reveal itself. So that's what I did. I kept the ring from the hotel in the small drawer of my desk at the shop, wrapped in the same plastic bag the front desk had given me. I didn't look at it often. I didn't need to. The truth was already beginning to take shape on its own. By the second week, I had stopped thinking of the situation as a question. It had become a timeline. One evening after closing the shop, I sat at the small desk in my office with the shop lights dimmed and the computer screen in front of me. The building was quiet except for the ticking sound engines make as they cooled down after running. I opened the Riverside Suites website. The woman at the desk had given me the exact date of the checkout when I picked up the ring. I started there. Room 214. Checkout, Thursday morning. I leaned back in the chair and tried to remember what Emily had said about that day. It didn't take long. That Wednesday, she had texted around 5 in the afternoon. Running late. Inventory meeting. Might be home after 8. She had walked through the door at 8:30 that night, looking tired but relaxed. I remembered because we ate leftovers instead of cooking. I wrote the date down. Then I opened the business travel receipt email the hotel had forwarded when I called back earlier that day. The manager had been polite and said they kept records for lost property reports. The reservation name wasn't Emily's. It was E. Carter. But the contact number on the reservation was my wife's phone. I checked another date from the email. 3 weeks earlier. Another Wednesday. I pulled up the calendar app Emily and I shared for basic things, doctor appointments, family visits, reminders about bills. That same Wednesday had a note from her. Late meeting. I sat there quietly and wrote the second date under the first. Then I kept going. The hotel manager had sent a short list of the previous reservations connected to that phone number so they could confirm whether any other items had been left behind. For reservations total. Each one on a weekday. Each one checking in late afternoon and checking out the following morning. Each one falling on a day Emily had told me she would be working late. The pattern was clean. Too clean to misunderstand. Still, I didn't rush. I didn't call the hotel again. I didn't ask the manager questions about who had checked in with her. I simply wrote the dates down in a small notebook I kept in the desk drawer, next to the plastic bag with the ring. For dates. For late nights. For hotel rooms. When I finished writing, I closed the notebook and shut off the office light. Outside, the parking lot was empty except for my truck. Driving home that night, I realized something else. The hardest part wasn't discovering the pattern. The hardest part was how quiet the truth was while it revealed itself. Once the dates were written down, the situation stopped feeling abstract. It had structure now. Patterns are one thing when they live in your head. They're different when they sit on paper in front of you. For hotel stays. For late nights at work. The same room type. The same check-in window between 5 and 6 in the evening. I looked at those notes for a long time before I did anything else. What became clear to me was simple. Whatever was happening wasn't new. It had already been going on for months. That meant whatever decisions needed to be made didn't have to be rushed. So I didn't rush. Instead, I did what mechanics do when a problem gets larger than the tools they have in the shop. I brought in someone whose job it was to look deeper. 3 days later, I met with a private investigator. His office was above a small insurance agency downtown. Nothing dramatic, just a narrow hallway, an old desk, and file cabinets that looked like they had been there since the 90s. His name was Alan Pierce. Former police detective. Quiet voice. The kind of man who listened more than he spoke. I didn't give him a long story. Just the facts. The hotel. The dates. The late nights. I placed the notebook on his desk and slid it toward him. He read through the pages slowly, nodding once or twice. "Do you want confirmation?" he asked. "Or the full picture?" The question hung in the air for a moment. "Facts," I said. "Just facts." He nodded again like he understood exactly what that meant. The investigation took about 2 weeks. During that time, my life continued exactly the same on the outside. The shop opened every morning. Customers dropped off their cars. Emily still left for work at 8 with her coffee and purse. Nothing about the routine changed. Then Alan called me on a Tuesday afternoon. His voice stayed calm, the way it had in his office. "I have the information you asked for." We met that evening. He laid out a thin folder on the desk between us. Inside were photographs, a few printed records, and a short written summary. The man's name was Mark Collins, pharmaceutical sales representative. His company supplied products to several medical offices in the region, including the one where Emily worked. The photos showed the same hotel parking lot I had driven through 2 weeks earlier. Emily's car, a second car parked beside it, and Mark Collins stepping out of the driver's seat. Alan didn't add commentary. He simply closed the folder and pushed it toward me. By then, the pattern had already finished forming. Emily came to talk 3 days later. I think she sensed something had changed, even though I hadn't said a word about the investigation. People notice silence when they're used to routine. That evening, she didn't go straight to the couch after dinner like she normally did. Instead, she stayed at the kitchen table while I rinsed the plates in the sink. "Jack," she said quietly. You've been distant lately. I dried my hands on a towel and sat down across from her. The kitchen light above the table cast the same warm circle it always had. The clock on the wall ticked steadily behind us. Nothing about the room felt different. But the conversation was already moving in a direction neither of us had planned. I've just been busy, I said. She watched me for a moment, like she was trying to decide whether to keep going. I feel like something's off, she said. I nodded once. Then I stood up and walked to the small cabinet by the hallway. Inside was a plain envelope I had placed there 2 nights earlier. When I came back to the table, I set the envelope down between us. Emily looked at it, but didn't touch it. What's that? She asked. I opened the flap and slid the contents out slowly. The plastic bag from the hotel. Inside it, the gold band caught the light from above the table. For a second, she didn't react. Her eyes simply stayed fixed on the bag like her mind was trying to place what she was seeing. Then she looked down at her left hand. The ring she wore was still there. I said very little. Riverside Suites called the shop, I told her calmly. They said you forgot this. The silence that followed was heavy but controlled. Emily didn't speak right away. She just stared at the table, then at the ring in the bag again. Her shoulders lowered slightly. The way people relax when they realize something they hoped was hidden is no longer hidden at all. You went there, she said quietly. It wasn't really a question. I nodded. That's where they found it. Another long pause settled between us. Emily opened her mouth once, then closed it again. I could see the moment she understood something important, that I wasn't asking questions. I wasn't angry. I wasn't arguing. I was simply sitting there with the evidence already in front of both of us. Finally, she spoke. How much do you know? I looked at the ring one more time before answering. Enough. The conversation didn't last long after that. Emily looked at the ring in the plastic bag for several seconds. Then she leaned back in the chair and exhaled slowly, like someone who had been holding tension for a long time and finally let it go. You hired someone, she said. I didn't answer the question directly. I simply stood up, gathered the plates from the table, and carried them to the sink. The water ran quietly while I rinsed them one by one. Behind me, the kitchen stayed silent. When I finished, I dried my hands and turned back toward the table. Emily hadn't moved. You already know, she said. Her voice sounded different now. Not defensive, not emotional, just flat. I nodded once. That's enough for me. She looked down at her hands again. Her thumb turned the ring on her finger slowly, the way people do when they're thinking. I didn't plan for it to happen, she said after a while. I didn't respond. There were probably explanations she could have offered. Stories about work stress, about how things started gradually, about how she hadn't meant for it to continue. But explanations weren't what I had been collecting. I had collected facts, and the facts had already arranged themselves. A few days later, I met with a lawyer. The process turned out to be as straightforward as the investigation had been. Paperwork first, financial records, property details, the house, the shop, bank accounts. Once the documents were filed, things began moving on their own. Lawyers communicated with each other. Requests for records went out. Hotel confirmations came back showing the reservation dates and payment methods used for the room. Credit card statements lined up with the same evenings Emily had written late meeting in the shared calendar. None of it required raised voices or dramatic confrontations. The system simply followed the trail of information that already existed. Emily moved into a small apartment across town while everything was being finalized. We didn't argue about it. It happened quietly, the same way the rest of the situation had unfolded. At the shop, life stayed steady. Customers still needed brake pads and new tires. Engines still made the same mechanical sounds they always had. The difference was that the uncertainty was gone. The truth, once it begins surfacing, doesn't move quickly, but it moves steadily. And once it starts, it rarely stops halfway. The divorce was finalized a little over 3 months after that evening at the kitchen table. By then, most of the difficult parts had already passed. Not because they were dramatic, but because the decisions had been made early. Once the paperwork began moving through the legal system, the rest followed a clear path. Emily's lawyer handled her side. Mine handled mine. Documents moved back and forth through email and certified envelopes. Financial records were reviewed. Property ownership was confirmed. The house and the shop had both been in my name long before Emily and I married, which made that part simple. There were no long court arguments. No public scenes. Just signatures. Emily came by the house one afternoon to collect the last of her things. I stayed out in the garage while she packed. When she finished, she left the key on the kitchen counter and closed the door behind her. That was the last time we spoke face to face. At the shop, nothing changed. Monday mornings still started the same way, with the metal door rolling open and the smell of cold air mixing with engine oil. Customers kept bringing their cars in with the same problems they'd always had. Loose belts, faulty starters, engines that refused to turn over on cold mornings. Work has a way of grounding you. Machines don't lie about what's wrong with them. When something breaks, the evidence is always there if you know where to look. That clarity felt familiar. The house felt quieter in the evenings after Emily moved out, but not in a heavy way. More like the quiet you notice after a long period of background noise finally stops. Some nights I ate dinner at the kitchen table. Other nights I just made something simple and stood by the counter. There were moments when memories surfaced. Holidays, road trips, the early years when everything between us had seemed straightforward. But I didn't spend time chasing explanations for how things changed. The important part was already settled. The truth wasn't hidden anymore. The ring from the hotel stayed in the drawer at my shop for a while after the divorce was finalized. I kept it there mostly because I had forgotten about it. One afternoon while cleaning the office, I found the plastic bag again. The gold band still looked exactly the same. For a moment, I turned it in my hand, reading the engraving inside. Jack and Emily forever. Then I closed the drawer and went back out to the shop floor. There were still engines waiting to be fixed. About 2 months after the divorce papers were finalized, I received another phone call at the shop. This time it wasn't a hotel. A woman introduced herself as Laura Collins. For a moment the name didn't register. Then she explained. Mark Collins' wife. Her voice stayed calm while she spoke, but there was a steadiness behind it that told me she had already worked through the shock. She said she had discovered the affair recently while going through financial records. Hotel charges, travel schedules, the same patterns I had seen months earlier. Eventually my name surfaced in the timeline. I just wanted to say thank you, she said. I didn't know what to say at first. You didn't hide it, she continued. You let the truth come out. We spoke for only a few minutes after that. When the call ended, I set the phone down and looked out across the shop floor. Nothing had changed. Engines still needed fixing. And life, quiet as ever, kept moving forward. That's the end of this story. If you made it all the way here, consider subscribing to stay with us. I've placed a couple of recommended videos on screen for you. Pick one and keep watching. I'll see you in the next story.